everyone, how are you this afternoon?
Good.
Fantastic, fabulous. It's a glorious sunny day outside, I think. I haven't been out most of it, but my name is Stacy Bassett, and I am a disability services specialist here at BGSU. I've been here for almost 5 years in this office. Before that, I worked in San Francisco in the Bay Area at a guide dog training organization, so I did a very different job. I was working with the dogs and training and students in class, so I was never sitting down. I was busy all the time, running around, doing different things. So I got my master's degree here at BGSU several years ago in rehabilitation counseling, and so it was like coming home when I got this job. So it's really nice to be back, and I'm so excited for this training today. So I understand that we have 3 people from dining services, yes? And we have someone from exercise science who works over at the rec center, right?
Yep.
Well, so what we're going to do is we're going to talk about delicious food while working out, right? Is that how we're going to make this work? So it's all good. But this is good. This is a very interactive training. So what I'd like is if you have any questions or any comments or anything you want to add, if you raise your hand, it's going to be up for a long time because I can't see you. So might as well just shout out any questions or comments that you have, okay? We're very informal here at Disability Services. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what our office does in case there's any question about that, and then we can kind of move into the training. So Disability Services is located in 38 College Park, so just down the hall from this room, and we provide academic and housing accommodations for students on campus. We also work with dining services quite a bit to discuss dining accommodations when warranted for students who have specific chronic health conditions or multiple dietary allergies, things like that, that could prevent them from, or that could cause some accommodations here on campus, okay? So I talk with the dietitian very often. So, and besides providing accommodations for students on campus, we also provide employment accommodations for faculty and staff here on campus. So if you ever need any accommodations from our office, you're welcome to give us a call. So some common academic accommodations that we often approve would be things like extra test time, a testing environment with limited distractions, note-taking assistance. We could talk about tests read orally, scribes for exams, things like that. Books in alternative format for students with print disabilities. A lot of our students take different medications or have different chronic health conditions, so our students are approved for early registration as well, so they can schedule their classes ahead of students in their same academic year. So that's just a couple of the accommodations. And when we review documentation and we determine eligibility for accommodations, we do that on a case-by-case basis. We don't say, oh, all of you students have this or that diagnosis, so you're all going to get this group of accommodations. We talk to the student, we have an interview with them, and figure out what they want to request from our office. So it's a very interactive process throughout it. We also, like I was saying earlier, we do provide housing accommodations as well, and that could be anything from air conditioning for asthma and allergies. We can talk about things like single rooms as an accommodation for a plethora of reasons, or a semi-private or private restroom are some of the often approved housing accommodations. In addition, we could look at things like accessible rooms for students who have mobility impairments, things like that. So the groups of students that we work with, it's a very broad spectrum of different disability types and chronic health conditions. So some examples of disabilities of students with disabilities that we might work with would be students with sensory disabilities, that's visual impairments or blindness, or students who are deaf or hard of hearing. And for mobility impairments, there could be a lot of different aspects of that. It could be someone who uses a wheelchair. It could be someone with mild weakness, maybe because of CP, cerebral palsy. Could be arthritis, a prosthetic limb. We work with students who have what we call invisible or hidden disabilities, and that's actually the largest group of students that we work with. And currently we have over 800 students who are registered with our office who are receiving academic and housing accommodations. So some of the invisible or hidden disabilities might be seizure disorders, mental health diagnoses, and that could be a host of different diagnoses, but some of the ones that I'll use as an example would be anxiety, depression, PTSD, OCD might be a few of those. students with specific learning disabilities, autism spectrum diagnoses, and ADHD. We also work with students, as I was saying earlier, who have chronic health diagnoses sometimes, and that could be things like diabetes or Crohn's disease, chronic migraines. Students might have IBS and contact us as well. So we, like I was saying, it's a very broad range of different diagnoses that we work with here on campus, and so more and more students with disabilities are coming to college, so happily our numbers continue to go up every year for students that we work with here on campus. Any questions before I move on to the next part? And don't be shy today, just pretend like the camera's not there. All right, so we're gonna review, it's gonna be a review of policies and procedures for accommodations. And the first thing we're gonna talk about is how to respond appropriately to a request for an accommodation. And so if you are 100% certain of how to provide the accommodation, you're welcome to respond immediately. In fact, we ask you to respond immediately. But if there is any sort of accommodation request that you're not sure how to accommodate, then what you want to do is contact Disability Services with any questions that you have about an accommodation that's being requested. Okay? So, and I'm talking about now, you know, if there's a class at a rec center and a person with a disability is asking to sign up, if you're not sure how to accommodate that student, you could contact our office. Or if someone comes into an all-you-care-to-eat, let's just say on campus, and has a dog with them, and you're not sure if it's an emotional support animal or a service dog, if you have any questions, you can always call our office. Do you like how I just used examples for everyone that are relevant? So it's really important to respond in a timely manner to any accommodation request, because if you don't, complaints can be filed if there's any sort of long delay, or if incorrect information is shared. So it's really important, if you're not sure of the answer to a question, that you just get in touch with us, and we're always happy to answer the question for you. So, you know, talking about sort of accommodations, I have an example. We had a student contact, or a family contact our office a few months ago, and there was a high school athlete who wanted to take part in one of our camps that were here on campus, and the student was hard of hearing and needed interpreters. And so we were able to get an interpreter for that student in a very timely fashion, and we had, I think, just a couple days lead time, just a couple days notice for this camp. And we later got a very happy letter from the family thanking our office for making sure that their daughter had equal access to the camp. So that was a really great experience for the student and for our office as well. The next thing that we're going to talk about is disability etiquette. And this is my favorite part, because obviously this training is not about me, but I am a walking poster child for things that happen regarding etiquette. So, you know, today we'll kind of, some of the examples are going to reflect things that have happened in my own life. So, you know, we'll just jump right in, and if you have any questions, like I said, just let me know. So the importance of providing effective communication with individuals with disabilities is what we're going to talk about. So it's really important to, when you're thinking about this whole process, and you know, if you are, if someone is coming in with a disability into either dining services or to the rec center, you want to talk to the person with the disability and not to any companion or to an interpreter if the person is deaf or hard of hearing. So an example would be, and I'm sorry, but like I said, these are all going to be examples about me. A few months ago, I was in a store registering for my wedding, and I was with my mom, and we were walking around looking at different things, and she was describing different items to me. And we got to the very exciting silverware section. Let me tell you how fun that is. And so I was looking at the different sort of designs of silverware, because that's what you do when you're registering to get married. So there was a very helpful store employee who was hovering about, and she came running up to my mother, and she said, "Oh, here is a fork for her to feel, and here's a knife that she might want to touch." And so I had a moment there where I could kind of talk with her about basically how important it is to talk directly to me, and then, you know, I just did it very low key. I just kept talking to her, and she finally got, you know, kind of understood that. Another example that happens very frequently to people with disabilities is in restaurants when a server comes up to take an order. A couple months ago, I was having dinner with my husband, and a server came up to him and said, how's her food? Does she like her salad? My husband was like, I don't know. You'll have to ask her. And so I had the opportunity in that moment to, again, educate about, you know, talking directly to the person with the disability. And, you know, I think sometimes that the reason why this can be concerning for people is, you know, a person may not be quite comfortable with how to address, let's say, me if I can't see, or how would a person address someone with who's hard of hearing. So it's important just to always look at the person and address them, and then they'll respond appropriately. Something else that often happens is sort of thoughts about the spread of disability. I was in that same store registering for my wedding, and I'd just been very busy that day for work. I'd been on my feet for the majority of the day, and I was being very dramatic and whining to my mother about my back was getting pretty sore, and I was like, oh, my back, you know, being very diva-ish. And all of a sudden, the same helpful employee came running up and said, oh, well, if you're having trouble walking, we do have a wheelchair you can use. And I'm like, oh, okay, you know, thank you very much, I'm good. But just sort of this assumption that if you have one disability, you may have others as well, is something that kind of happens a lot. So one thing that I gave to everyone was a handout about, actually an etiquette sort of booklet. And what I like to do during these trainings is, if everyone's okay with this, there's just a couple little sections I like to have people read out loud so then we can discuss them. And there may be a paragraph or so long. Is everyone comfortable with doing that? Okay, I'm getting a couple so I'm gonna go with everyone's okay with that. All right, so the first thing that I'd like to have someone read is on page 4, and it says, ask before you help.
I can start if you want.
Thank you, that'd be fantastic.
Okay, ask before you help. Just because someone has a disability, don't assume she needs help. If the setting is accessible, people with disabilities can usually get around fine. Adults with disabilities want to be treated as independent people. Offer assistance only if the person appears to need it. A person with a disability will oftentimes communicate when she needs help. And if she does not want help, ask how before you act.
All right, any questions about that? Okay, and what that means, you know, if you're out in a public place and you see someone with a disability who may look like they need help, you know, feel free to ask, hey, do you need any assistance? And that person might say no, or they might ask for some, depending on what's going on. But it's really important not just to think, oh, there's a person out there with a cane or a guide dog or in a wheelchair, so they automatically need help. Because if you just walk up to someone and grab them and try to offer assistance that way, you know, again, if we're talking about a person who's blind, you could kind of interfere with their orientation to the environment. So if someone, you know, came up to me and grabbed my arm and kind of moved me in a different direction, I would lose kind of focus about where I was in the environment. I'd have to try to figure out how to get back on track. You know, it's really important to ask if you have any concern or question about someone's safety or if they need any help in a specific environment. And typically the person with a disability knows what their needs are, so if they need help, a person's typically gonna ask for it themselves. All right, also on page 4, there's a section that starts with be sensitive about physical contact.
I'll go.
All right, thank you.
Some people with disabilities depend on their arms for balance. Grabbing them, even if your intention is to assist, could knock them off balance. Avoid patting a person on the head or touching his wheelchair, scooter, or cane. People with disabilities consider their equipment part of their personal space.
That one's pretty self-explanatory, but you know, the whole thing about personal space and, you know, going up to someone and grabbing someone's arm, if, you know, if someone has balance issues, and you just go up to someone and grab their arm or try to help move their walker, their cane, whatever, it can cause them to lose their balance and actually fall. So what you're trying to do is offer assistance, and it could actually make the situation dangerous for that person. So, you know, again, ask if the person needs any assistance, but don't assume that they do. And in addition to that, you know, about physical contact, if you were to come up to me and not say anything and all of a sudden grab my arm, I'm gonna make an emotive sound of surprise, okay, because I didn't hear you there. I have a twin who's also blind, and if someone comes up to her and touches her without her awareness that they're in the environment, she's been known to kind of flail out in surprise. She actually gave my brother a black eye. He tried to sneak up on her once. And so it's just really important. You could either, you know, really scare someone, or you could cause them to lose their balance. So just, and in addition to all of this, in terms of touching someone's wheelchair, it really does become part of that person's identity. So it's sort of like, you know, coming up to someone and touching their child or someone's purse without permission, you know, it's just sort of an intrusive thing to do. And, you know, people feel the same way about their mobility equipment, wheelchair, cane. Obviously, I feel that way about my guide dog, but that's a whole different section. Any questions so far?
I was just going to mention about the dog.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times I work in the food court,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes we'll have the dogs inside the food court, and people will just go up and start petting the dog
Mm-hmm.
without permission.
Yep.
That's not proper. I mean, you're not supposed to do that, right?
That's correct. You're not supposed to pet a service dog while it's working. But it is up to the person with the disability whose dog it is to educate if they choose to about that, or to, you know, tell the public no. Yeah. All right, so the next thing I'd like someone to read is on page 6, and it's think before you speak, and then it says speak directly to the person. And we've already kind of discussed this, but it's always good to have it elaborated upon.
I can read it.
Thank you.
Always speak directly to the person with a disability, not to his companion, aide, or sign language interpreter. Making small talk with a person who has a disability is great. Just talk to him as you would with anyone else. Respect his privacy. If you ask about his disability, you may feel like you are treating him as a disability, not as a human. However, many people with disabilities are comfortable with questions about their disability after getting to know someone. A simple, I don't feel comfortable sharing that, by the person with a disability can set the tone if it is not something that he or she is willing to share.
And this is an interesting sort of thing to think about, because for some reason, having a disability, for some people, it makes it okay to ask very personal questions. Sorry, again with the personal examples, but a couple years ago I was in a restaurant, and this man came up and like leaned down over my table while I was having a really good gossip with one of my friends. And he kind of got close to my face and he goes, "How long have you been blind?" And I'm like, "I'm trying to eat my organic soup here, all right?" Like, I'm having a really good conversation. So I was born blind, and so I'm very comfortable discussing my disability and discussing my blindness, but some people are not. You know, some people acquire a disability later in life, and they could still be going through the stages of acceptance or whatever, and may not be in a place where they're comfortable having a total stranger just come up and start asking questions like, "How much can you see? So tell me, can you walk at all?" You know, things like, I mean, just really awkward, very personal questions. So, you know, I guess just using social etiquette, if you wouldn't ask a perfect stranger that question, don't assume that it's okay to ask the person with a disability really intrusive questions on first meeting. All right, who wants to read on page 6, don't make assumptions?
I can.
Excellent, thank you.
People with disabilities are the best judge of what they can or cannot do. Don't make decisions for them about participating in any activity. Depending on the situation, it could be a violation of the ADA to exclude people because of a presumption about their limitations.
All right, so I have a recent example of when this happened to me. And so when I was planning my honeymoon, one of the things that I really wanted to do at the resort where I was going was go on a trail ride. It was in the mountains. I thought, oh, what a beautiful thing to do. And I've been riding horses since I was young. I grew up, my great-grandfather had horses, so I grew up with horses all the time. And then when I was 14, I started taking English riding lessons. And I did that all the way through college. I learned how to jump. I'm fairly proficient around horses. And, you know, but there's an assumption, oh my gosh, she's blind. How does that even work? Like, oh, that's so, you know, I think that would be very dangerous and very scary if you couldn't see. And so there's that assumption that was made. So I contacted the resort and I let them know in advance that I would like to schedule a trail ride and that I had a disability and I was blind, but I had a lot of experience with horses. And the immediate response was, I am sorry, but we cannot accommodate your request. There's a safety issue, so we're going to have to tell you no. Well, I work for disability services. I know a lot about different laws, you know, pertaining to disability, including the Americans with Disabilities Act. And I knew that what this person was telling me was a violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act because you know, it was something that was available to the public, and so I couldn't be excluded simply because I have a disability. And so what I decided to do was to, instead of trying to fight it over the phone from a couple states away, I thought it might be easier to actually go in and talk with the person directly at the barn and, you know, talk about my riding experience and all of that. So, and plus I didn't want, you know, I was planning my wedding, I just didn't want it to ruin all that part, you know. So I decided just to take care of it on my honeymoon. So I went to the barn and I talked with a supervisor at the barn. And I said, you know, I'd like to go on a trail ride. I'm very comfortable around horses. Here's my experience. I, you know, reiterated what I told them on the phone. And she said, we can't accommodate you. She said, it's too dangerous. It's a liability for us. We can't have you riding horses. And I said, you know, this is, you know, first of all, I want to talk this through with you because you don't require anyone else to do any sort of, you know, ability testing, like before they can ride. You know, you have children riding, you have, you know, people riding who may have never been on a horse before. You may have someone who had like a 3 mimosa breakfast because they're on vacation and, you know, runs out and gets on the trail ride, you know. So I said, my level of proficiency is pretty high with horses. And I'm like, these are trail horses. They're going to plod down the trail. I mean, let's be honest, that's what they do. And I said, so can you talk to me about what's causing you anxiety so that we can work through this? Well, it's a liability issue. You know, you're going to hit your head on tree branches on the trail. Well, if you tell me in advance, I'll duck. And we're all wearing helmets, and so that shouldn't be an issue. And I said, and not to mention, you know, you are violating the Americans with Disabilities Act. And I told her what section of it. And I said, so, you know, I'd like you to reconsider what you're telling me. And she said, I'll talk to the director of the stable and I'll get back to you. So a couple hours later, I got a call. Because of your riding experience, we are going to accommodate you, but I just have to make sure that you're aware that this is extremely dangerous and that you're putting yourself in great danger by riding one of our horses. And if you are going to ride, we have stipulations. The stipulations are you have to be on a lead rope, and we're going to modify the trail so you don't go, you know, by any of the parts that could be considered dangerous. Oh, and because it's so much shorter, we can either, you know, charge you way less for the ride, or we can make you do the same trail 3 times. Oh, and you know, our horses aren't used to having horses so close, so there's going to be increased liability because the horse could kick your horse. So, are you still interested in riding? Oh, and if there's any sort of thunder, you know, we can't have anybody ride if there's thunder and lightning. Does that sound appealing to anyone in this room, that scenario? Like, does that sound like fun to anyone? No. So guess what I said? No. I'd love to ride. Thank you so much. I'm so glad we could work this out. Because I had to, you know, at that point, I had to educate this person. So I got out there Friday, and I went to ride this horse, and they gave me this very polite, sort of grandfatherly gentleman of a horse who just stood very calmly as I got up on the horse's back. And there was a moment of shocked silence when I was able to mount the horse on my own. Oh, the other thing the person said during our discussion was, we don't have therapeutic riding horses here. So just so you know that. Therapeutic riding horses are the kind for people with pretty significant disabilities where they have sidewalkers and someone who leads the horse, and they just kind of get to walk around and do some different exercises with the horse to do like muscle strengthening and confidence building and things like that. Like I said, I was an English rider, and I showed and I jumped, and so the whole thing was kind of offensive. So we rode this trail, this modified trail, 3 times. My husband could barely mount the horse. He almost fell off. They barely gave him any instruction. And, you know, I was on a lead rope and everything. And it turns out that it ended up being an okay ride. But besides the fact that people had made these assumptions about me based on my blindness and not based on my skill level, my ability level, it was a very painful experience. And it made me feel like I wasn't as important as everybody else, that I didn't have the same amount of value. And it made me feel like we were back in the 60s, to be honest, and just that there was still a lot of discrimination, and there's still a lot of education that needs to be done. So even though I was able to sort of change the attitude of one person, it kind of showed me that in certain areas, you know, outdoor activities and areas where a person is required to demonstrate some level of skill, that where there could be a safety issue, that there's still a lot of training to be done. So it's really important that, you know, if you have a preconceived idea about someone based on a specific disability that person might have disclosed to you, that it's really important to ask that person what their ability level is and not to make assumptions based on your fear or your lack of knowledge about a disability or about the way that something can be done. Anybody have any questions about that one? All right. So the final thing I'm going to have you read out of this etiquette booklet is going to be on page 31, and it's people who use service animals.
What part of this are we reading?
The section on page 31 that says people who use service animals?
The bullet points?
Yes.
Holy cow, that's a lot to read. Cindy, I think you're up on this one.
Okay, I'll start. Okay, so while you may inquire whether an animal is a service animal, the person may not have information identifying it as such. This means that in general, you will need to modify a no animals policy to allow the person to enter with her service animal. Bearing a direct threat to health and safety, this requirement of the ADA is generally thought to take precedence over any health codes, such as those for restaurants and personal preferences, such as those of taxi drivers prohibiting pets.
All right, so that was all the rules and regulations about service animals pertaining to the ADA, but there's some other stuff in there about, you know, please don't ever pet or feed a service dog. Well, we can just kind of discuss that. So I'm sure some of you, being part of dining services, have had some experiences with service animals here on campus. Would that be right?
Yes.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about a service animal, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about emotional support animals, because I'm sure that you've heard that term as well, especially being on a college campus. So a service animal is a dog that has been trained to perform a specific task to mitigate an aspect of a person's disability. So for me, my dog, who's completely sleeping through my presentation down here, how rude, she has been trained to guide me effectively through the environment with cues from me, okay? I probably should tell you a little bit about her. Any dog people in this room right now?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah? Yeah. Well, this is Sophie, and she is my 6-year-old black lab guide dog. I've had her since August of 2011. She is my diva. She is my little sensitive flower, if you will. She hates rain. She will avoid puddles, even at the cost of shoving me into the mud with her hip to avoid even a couple inches of water or a couple centimeters of water on the sidewalk. Her greatest joy in life comes from being with me and doing her work correctly, but she's very sensitive. So for the first year or so, I had to treat her like fine china because she would worry so much about making mistakes. She brushed me into a plant once that was outside of the Starbucks in the student union for a while, And for, I'd say about 6 months, she had to creep past that spot, even after they removed the plant from that area. And she'd have to look at me and stare at me to make sure that she was getting me past the scary spot in the student union. So she's a very sweet dog. And, you know, guide dogs are just one type of service dog. There are service dogs for people with mobility impairments, and they do a ton of different tasks for people, everything from picking up dropped items, helping people remove things from laundry baskets, pull stuff out of the dryer. I need one of those just for that. They can actually remove items, open the refrigerator door and like pull out a bottle of water if directed to do so. They're taught how to turn lights on and off if asked. For people who have difficulty moving in bed, they can actually assist the person with like turning in the middle of the night. There are dogs who can alert to seizures, or dogs who are trained to alert to low blood sugar. So there's a ton of different types of tasks that a dog can be trained to do to mitigate an aspect of someone's disability. Dogs are great. I love dogs. There's also dogs that are called psychiatric service dogs. Have we heard of these at all? Okay, you haven't? Okay, and basically these dogs are trained to mitigate an aspect of a person's disability. Typically, it could be, there's more and more dogs now being trained for veterans with PTSD to interrupt anxiety or to sort of do something to do a specific behavior if somebody is having a flare-up of PTSD. And, you know, it could be that the dog is trained to very specifically paw at the person during specific times. The dog could be trained to actually be on a leash and remove the person from the environment that's causing the flare-up of the symptoms. So, you know, there's a lot of different things that dogs can be trained to do to mitigate an aspect of a person's disability. Now, because we're on a college campus, I'm going to briefly talk to you about emotional support animals. Service dogs are covered by the Americans with Disabilities Act and are allowed to go into public places. Okay, Sophie can come here with me to work in my office. She can go to restaurants. She can go to the dining hall with me. She can go to the rec center with me. She can go anywhere that I go where the public is allowed to go. I wouldn't take her into a restaurant kitchen. Don't worry, that's not a place for her to go. But certainly, anywhere that the public is able to go, Sophie can go with me. Okay, because she's a service dog and she's covered by the ADA. If you see a person with a dog out in public, there are 2 questions you're legally allowed to ask about that dog. Does anybody know what those 2 questions are? Nope. Nope? All right. So you can ask, has this dog been trained to mitigate an aspect of your disability? Yes. Okay. If the answer is yes, the second question is, what task has the dog been trained to perform? Okay? If someone says, oh, my dog provides me with companionship when I'm feeling worried, that's not something a dog's trained to do. Dogs just do that naturally, okay? If they said, my dog, picks up dropped items, or my dog does this or that, that's something that's considered to be a task that the dog has been trained to do, okay? So we have service dogs. Now what's becoming more and more prominent, or prevalent, I should say, are dogs who are being brought into places and being called emotional support dogs. So they do just what what the name implies. They provide emotional support. These dogs are not covered by the Americans with Disabilities Act. They're considered like a companion. With the appropriate documentation from a licensed medical professional or psychologist, psychiatrist, we can approve them as an accommodation in the residence hall for people. But those dogs don't have the same rights. They're only allowed to be in that student's dorm room with them. They're not allowed to go into the dining halls or the rec center or different places on campus that are not the person's room. Because what that dog does is just, they're just there to be a companion for the person. Okay, and this is a very gray area. So that's why it's really important to know that you can ask those 2 questions if you're out in public and you see, or you're out somewhere, or you're working on campus and you see a dog that you're just not sure what they're doing, what task that dog is doing for someone. You are able to ask those 2 questions legally. Okay? Does that all make sense to everyone? Mm-hmm. Any questions about that? All right. So just a couple other little etiquette things about service dogs. It's really important not to pet. If you're out in public and you are a dog person, you see this beautiful dog coming down the street. I'm not biased at all. I'm not talking about Sophie being beautiful or anything. But you know, if you see a dog out with someone, it's really important to not just go up, as you were talking about earlier, like in the union, you said you see people just kind of flocking around a service dog in the union and petting that dog, right? Well, it's really important to ask first, because that dog is trained to do some sort of task. And just as an example, a guide dog for someone who's blind, that dog is trained to guide them through the environment. So if there's someone, you know, petting that dog and loving on the dog, and that can distract the dog from its work, which could cause the person with a visual impairment to be in danger. With my previous dog, I was in San Francisco one day early in our partnership, and we were in a coffee shop and someone started petting my dog, and she was sort of like a tornado of joyous energy, so she loved attention. She was just loved it. And so she was getting all like excited and wiggly, so I had to ask the person to stop petting her. Well, it distracted my dog so much that when we walked out of the coffee shop, she face planted me into a parking meter. So for that dog, she couldn't have any interaction with the public until she got a little bit more settled with me as my partner. And now Sophie, she's a very gentle soul, and her, like I said, she just wants to please me, and she's very low key. And so she's allowed to have interaction with people if they ask, unless we're like actively crossing a street or doing something where she has to have her full concentration on me at all times. So each person has a different comfort level with the amount of interaction a person can have with their service animal, ranging from you can pet all the time, anytime you want, to no one's ever allowed to pet that dog while it's working, okay? And there's no right answer to that, but it's always important to ask first. The other thing that's really important is to remember to never feed somebody's service dog. Anyone have any idea like why that would be something that shouldn't be done? I love how boisterous you all are, my gosh. Well, the answer is, there's a couple reasons why it's really not okay to ever feed someone's service dog. Okay, the first is that most people have their dogs on a very specific diet, and it's a very consistent diet that doesn't change much. So if you're introducing in foods that aren't part of that dog's daily diet, it's going to lead to intestinal woe, and then that person's going to have to clean it up, all right? Or vomiting, or just can make that dog ill. So if you could, that's one reason why it's never okay to feed a service dog. Now, for those of you who work in dining services, what might the other reason be why it's not okay to feed someone else's dog? All right, picture this scenario. You ready for this? Beautiful restaurant, beautiful food. You're sitting at your table, you just got this amazing dinner, you've been looking forward to it all day. All of a sudden, a dog walks into the restaurant, a service dog, and is walking past your table and grabs some of your food off your plate. Yeah, no good, right? So dogs, we don't introduce a bunch of different people food and that kind of behavior to our service dogs so that they are appropriate when they go out into restaurants and aren't trying to beg for food or snatch food off people's tables. Because let me tell you, I'm pretty observant, but I'm totally blind, and I may not know if my dog comes in and grabs a burger off someone's table or something. So it's really important to not feed a service dog out in public at any time. All right? Any questions about service dogs?
So when Cindy asked earlier about when people pet your dog if
Yep.
you go to the union or something like that, how do you recommend that the manager of that location handle that? So do they get involved, or do they just
Not
let the
typically.
person
It's up to the person. Everybody has, like I said, a different comfort level about what interaction the public can have with their dog. So if I'm sitting at the union and somebody pets my dog, I'm either going to engage with that person and have a conversation, or I'm going to tell the person, please don't pet my dog right now because she's working. Okay, depending on what we're doing and my mood. So if you see someone petting a service dog, you don't have to go up and kind of interject yourself into the situation, because the person who has a service dog has had training on how to manage the public if they've gone to any of the guide dog or service dog organizations around the country.
Yeah.
Okay, does that make sense?
Yep.
All right, perfect. Any other questions about that? All righty. So If you meet up with a person who is coming into the various facilities on campus, various places on campus, and they have a disability, one thing, if you're going to talk to someone with a mobility impairment, let's say someone in a wheelchair, sort of etiquette is, if it's really hard if that person's sitting down and you're kind of standing right above the wheelchair, right over top of that person, it's hard for them to make eye contact with you. So a couple recommendations are either back up a few feet so that person isn't like craning their neck up to stare at you, or if you can kind of sit down in a chair so you're kind of more on that person's level. Does that make sense? Okay, so it's just really important to make sure that you're helping people to feel welcome on campus at various locations and in various venues. So you work at the rec center, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, and what, are you an instructor?
Personal trainer.
Oh, fun. All right, excellent. How long have you been there? Are you pretty new?
Yes. Just like a few months.
Oh, welcome, welcome. So one place where there's still a lot of questions about what a person with a disability can do would be at a facility like a rec center, where it's a very lots of physical activity, right? And there might be questions about what that person's able to do. So it's okay to, if you have and I'm not trying to target you singly, but I'm just trying to make sure I cover everything with everyone here. So if you, if you have any specific questions, feel free to ask that person directly. Do you need any accommodations to use the equipment? Or, do you need any assistance from me? Can I show you anything? And then it's really important to respect what that person says is needed. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay, and that was really for everybody, but I like to ask, where all the rec center people work and stuff. Personal training, that'd be really fun. So if you ever do have any questions about something, if someone approaches you and starts asking for specific accommodations, if you are unsure of how to provide that accommodation, again, it's really important to either give us a call, give us an email. If you go to our website, it's bgsu.edu/disability services. You can look up our phone number on the website and give us a call if you have questions. You can always email us as well. So, and it's not just for questions about accommodations. If you're around campus and you see something that doesn't appear to be accessible, you're welcome to give us a call. And that could be something like an accessible door button that maybe isn't working. It could be because students have chained their bikes to one of the accessible door buttons. So you can call and report that to us and call campus operations. It could be that something's not working, like a door button or something. So if that happens, you're welcome to give us a call so we can report it, or you can report it to campus operations yourself. If there's ever an elevator that's down, we can't know everything about every building on campus all the time because we're not, constantly everywhere. So if there's like an elevator that's ever down, feel free to get in touch with us and let us know, or call campus operations. In the wintertime, if sidewalks are impassable due to snow, if the main travel areas are, you're welcome to give us a call and let us know, again, so we can contact campus operations. So, it's important to just know that we should all work together to promote accessibility on campus. Because there are ramifications of a non-inclusive environment, and that could be, anything from just, hurting someone's feelings all the way up to a lawsuit because there's a violation of the ADA. So, it's really important to kind of all work together to ensure that we are part of an inclusive environment for everyone with disabilities and that this is a supportive campus to be part of. And that's all I have for training this afternoon. Does anybody have any questions at this point?
I have a question.
Yes.
We have stanchions in the food court.
Mm-hmm.
What is the requirement on the width?
You know what? If you contact our office, I know that Peggy Dennis, our director, has gone over and looked at a lot of different things. She talks a lot with dining services, and I don't have the actual width requirements memorized. I'm not quite that.
What was her last name?
Her last name is Dennis. It's Peggy Dennis, and what I'll do is I can check on that, and I can. I'm assuming you put down. Are you Cindy? Okay. I'll get back in touch with you and let you know that answer. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Any other questions?
Nope.
All right. Well, I really appreciate that this large group of people all came out today to participate in this training. And if you ever have any questions at any point, please don't hesitate to call our office or send us an email, okay? And thanks for coming today.
Thank you.